Nick. How are you doing? What's our topic for today?
Political correctness in comedy and democracy. Political correctness, cancel culture, big problems today. We're becoming less and less tolerant of those who are intolerant. But even in the tyrants and the courts of the monarchs, the jester was always kept around, the comedian of the day, because the king tends to get surrounded by yes men who ultimately create an echo chamber. And there's a truth deficit that is absolutely detrimental to the king and the success of the kingdom. Well, what about a democracy? How important is it to get out of the echo chamber and to have truth in a democracy? Today, this intoleration is affecting comedians who are getting canceled by politically correct hecklers. We're going to bring on a guest today to look at, could comedy be the canary in the coal mine for our democracy? Will we fail or will we succeed based off our ability to tolerate people saying things that may offend us or we may not like?
Today we have an amazing guest, a stand-up comedian who has taken her passion for entertaining and critical thinking nationwide, from the airwaves to organizations, from universities to corporations, creating a seismic shift in mindsets and revolutionizing the way we address issues of diversity and leadership. If you can laugh at it, you can get through it, is not only her motto, but the invaluable lesson she seeks to instill in others. She is the CEO and founder of Frame, which is the Foster Russell Alliance for Meaningful Expression, which is a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to inspire free speech, inclusion, social change, and empowerment through education and mentorship. As a speaker, humorist, TV and radio personality, author, entrepreneur, wife, and mother. She has a long list here. Karith's sense of duty, service, along with her righteous sense of humor, have made her a positive force of change. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Karith Foster. Let's bring her on the screen. Karith, thanks so much for being here. I'd like to add master of time management to your repertoire. There's more to your bio I wanted to share, and I have to say you're such an inspiration. So let's kick it off with one, in a brief description. What is your source of inspiration to all the things that you do?
Probably just the energy that I get, the love that I feel and that I receive in the work that I do, and being and having an amazing family and network of friends, and just knowing that my part of my purpose is to bring people together. So that's my inspiration, truly.
Awesome. Nick, do you have any questions?
Well, so Karith, you're a comedian. And it seems like you do lots of things, but you're also a comedian, right? So I've been reading, a lot of comedians are getting frustrated with their audiences, right? So it used to be you needed to push the envelope to be a comedian, right? You have to be able to get close to almost offending people or being able to speak your mind and speak freely in order to be successful. Well, so we've been interviewing some of our previous guests talking about the issue of polarization and the issue of toleration and free speech. How much is this cancel culture and some of the political correctness trends that we're seeing affecting, in your experience, the comedy scene? Are people getting shut down or heckled for saying the wrong words or pronouns?
Right now, I think there is a hypersensitivity that is becoming more vocal, right? I mean, listen, the role of a comedian is to tell the truth. And not everybody wants to hear the truth. And there are a lot of people who, are thinking that, well, that's not my truth, so you're not talking to me, and they can move on with their lives and be okay. There are other people who are like, well, that isn't my truth, and I'm going to say something about it. And I'm going to make sure and she knows, and he knows, and everybody knows. There should be artistic license given to comedians, of course. I mean, listen, the number one rule is to be funny. But here's the thing, comedy, love it or hate it, is subjective. And that's the blessing and the curse of it. So not everything is going to be amusing or humorous or funny to everyone. But I think the people who are finding the offense are missing the objectivity of what a lot of comics do bring to the table. And they usually, every comic I know who's worth their weight in gold has always been about not just telling the truth, but shedding light on topics that are taboo. We want to make people think. We want to make them not just be on the surface level of things. It's like, let's go deeper with this. And rarely is anyone out there doing that maliciously, right? When you're talking to me, I mean, the idea is to point out the absurdity of things like homophobia and sexism and racism and violence and, all the awful, horrible things that we know aren't acceptable to society, and the general public. But the role of the comic is to be like, hey, listen, we're going to talk about this. I'm going to make you think about this. And you know what? We're even going to laugh about it a little bit.
Yeah, and that's the therapy of it.
The therapy.
Very cathartic.
I've heard a lot of comedians describe comedy as therapy. Is that pretty accurate?
It can be. For some comics, it's actually their therapy. Some of them should be in therapy, but they use their stage time to work it out. But you know what? No, it is therapy in the sense that there's a catharsis, right? That comes, and a healing that comes from talking about things that are universal, things that connect all of us, things that are painful. I mean, my motto is, if you can laugh at it, you can get through it. And every single one of us, nobody has escaped trauma in their life in some form or another. Now, some people's trauma is extreme. Some people's is, they had, crappy time in their adolescence. Everybody has something though. And the idea is to, at least for me, I can only speak on my behalf personally, to connect us, knowing that we're not going through this alone. We actually have this camaraderie in our experiences, which I think is partly, why comedy is so critical, especially right now, where there's so much polarization and division. We need to see even more that we have more in common than we don't, because we do.
So what is absurd about our how divided we are and how polarized? I mean, for some people, that's the water we swim in every single day. It's all we've known. We grow up, we walk down the street, we drive in our cars and look over in a window and we see another person, we're profiling them. Are they a Democrat or Republican? That's just the way that we think. We are homo politicus. All of our news, the only way they talk about every dimension of human life is through the political dimension. We're swimming in division. I don't think we can see the absurdity of it.
And you said something that was really brilliant. Oh, I'm sorry, Angela. I didn't mean to.
People don't date, and this happened to my oldest son. When they found out who he voted for, they're like, "I think I need to reconsider our dating situation." I was in shock. Really. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just gonna say, what you actually said, Nick, when you brought this question up, was that you said the word programmed, and that's exactly right. People have been programmed to seek out the division. We've been programmed to pick a side, to pick a tribe. We have been programmed to, and it's brilliant programming, because every single one of us wants to belong, right? That's just part of our human nature. And unfortunately, that desire has been manipulated. By who exactly, I don't know entirely.
That was my next question.
But certainly the media has played its part without question. under whose direction, I can't say for sure, but having worked in the media 20 some years ago, starting off as a journalist, got my degree in it, I saw where it was heading, and it does, it is disheartening because, people want ratings. They want the most salacious stories. They want, what's going to keep people glued to the TV. And when you can like really hone in on that need to belong and to be like on the right side of things, whatever that side is, it's addictive. It's almost as addictive as social media, right? Getting those likes and seeing how many people are responding to you, having your beliefs reaffirmed constantly, as opposed to be giving alternate ideas or even, something to compare it to. We're in a very dangerous place, but I think that's what comedy can do. And you can do it under the guise of comedy. So it's not this in your face lecture. It's not this, daunting, totalitarian like point of view. You're given the option, take it or leave it. But let's all, and I use humor in all of the work that I do. As you said, I wear many hats. I speak a lot about diversity and inclusion. I actually coined the term inversity because I think traditional diversity and inclusion has been done very poorly and caused more division and separation. But I think, humor is such a great way to neutralize the space, right? Because especially when you're talking about things that are very polarizing, that are very taboo, you have people who are coming to the table on the offense or the defense, right? And the only way you're going to get through to anybody's heart and into anybody's mind is to create a neutral space for people to be open to hearing new ideas.
You mentioned this inversity. I was reading about this in your bio. It's a program about inclusion, and rather using the word diversity, like you said, you use inversity. It seems like it's intentional, or in a way changes our mindset on how we approach inclusion. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
You hit the nail on the head. It absolutely is intentional. Listen, if you even look at the word diversity, right? At the root of it, it has divide and division, right? And we know, like on a surface level, like diversity is a good thing. Having a diverse portfolio is awesome. Having a diverse environment is wonderful too. It means you're getting other ideas from people who've had other experiences, hopefully all of it coming together to enhance something and make it better. But the problem is the way traditional D&I, or DEI as they call it now, diversity, equity, inclusion training and programming, has been shared across so many platforms for decades now. You're put into groups. Okay, well, you're only considered diverse if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, if you're differently abled, if you're part of the LGBT plus community. You're not really diverse if you're a straight cisgender white guy. Well, that's ridiculous. Everybody's diverse because everybody's bringing something different to the table. To say, to put people into these categories is the antithesis of true inclusion. So I don't know how you can even say that they really go together. I want to take the victimization out of the conversation and the vilification out of this conversation, because who wants to be put into either of those categories? We're not monoliths. We are people who have multiple facets to our person. We're not just one part of our identity, our physical identity, or our political identity, or our gender. There is so much more to us. And so inversity is about shifting the focus from what separates and divides us to what do we have in common? How can we be truly inclusive of one another? But most importantly, and this is really critical, how can we be introspective? Meaning understanding your value, your worth, your connection to humanity. Because when you can see those things in yourself, that's when you can see them in someone else.
That's deep. Say that again.
Sure. I will that say last it louder line. For the people in the back.
Iconic.
No, inversity is the introspection portion, which to me is the most important part. It's understanding your value and your worth, so that you can see that in someone else. And I think that's where a lot of us have misstepped lately, because there are a lot of people who, let's be honest, don't even really like themselves. They don't love themselves. They don't take care of themselves as we should. And, there's this whole idea that self-care is selfish, to the contrary. But if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not valuing yourself, how in the world could you possibly value another human being? And I think it's that and this need to belong, which is where people kind of fall off track. And if we can get those things tied in together, I mean, there have been so many studies of people who join hate groups, right? Whatever that hate group is. And they're really people who just felt alone and ignored, and they wanted to belong to something else. And they felt welcomed by the people in those groups. It wasn't that they themselves were hateful and just wanted to, be nasty people. They wanted to belong. And that was the culture that took them in.
It's just so crazy that today, in order to belong to a group, we have to have an enemy. It's like, oh my gosh, where do I fit in? Who are my people? You know what we need? A boogeyman. I got it. Let's go find somebody that's not like me. And then how do I know who I am? Not that, not that, not that, not that, not that. I guess I'm this. I have to pit myself against. Isn't that the craziest thing? That we have like this war mentality almost. I might be exaggerating, but let me ask you, what's your experience going into and doing these inversity trainings? What has been, what's the thing? Like when people feel they can't connect with other people who are different, or they want to shut them down or convert them or change their ideology or something. What's your experience of what the thing is that's behind that?
I think a lot of it is programming. As I said, we've been taught from an early age. I say there are 3 reasons why we stereotype and have unconscious bias. The first is that it's human nature. And this goes back to when we were cave people and we had to like fight or flight, right? Survival of the fittest. And we had to discern whether or not something was a threat. Back in the day, was it a physical threat like a warring tribe or a saber-toothed tiger? Now is it an emotional threat? Am I going to be taken out of my comfort zone? Right? Having to deal with someone who I don't know because they're not from the same place I'm from. They don't speak the same language. They don't look like I do or love like I do or vote like I do. What kind of threat are they? Then the fact is we've learned it. We've picked things up from our families. Our people do this. This is where we come from. This is who we are. Those people over there, they do. That's where the otherizing begins, right? And I often talk about growing up watching Disney movies, right? Who are the princesses? What do they look like? Even though they may be different shades now, they're all still petite. They all have certain features. People who play video games, who are the villains, the terrorists, the mob guys, we get this stuff ingrained in our conscious and our subconscious. And lastly, we have this thing called the ego, right? Or the id. And the ego is very powerful. The ego likes to be right. And what better way to feel like you are in control than by being able to put somebody else in a category or in a box. And we even do that to ourselves sometimes. And so, the experiences that I've had when I do the work that I do, because of how I approach it, because I use the humor, because I come to the table not to lecture, but to create an experience for people to have that mind shift and that heart shift, it's amazing. And I have tremendous results, and it's so empowering for me and for my audience. Before things shut down with COVID, I was at a university in Iowa, and I'm Iowa. Okay. So not a lot of folks looking like me that were there. And this one faculty member came up afterwards. There was an employee development day. And she said, Karith, she said, I've been in education for 25 years. I've been coming to diversity workshops for 20 of those years. And this is the best one I've ever come to. And I was like, thank you. And then she said something where you're not sure if you're going to get a backhanded compliment. She goes, I don't know how to say this. I'm like, okay. So I just braced myself. She goes, but I have no idea what your political affiliation is. And I said, well, good, because you shouldn't, because that's not my job. I'm not here to push my thoughts or my opinions on you. I'm here to help you open up so that you can have better relationships with people, regardless of what their political affiliations are, their religious beliefs, their sexuality, you know what I mean? Like, that's my job, is to get you to connect to other people. And that's what's been missing.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what kind of box to put you in.
Well, what this makes me think of identity politics, which you had mentioned media and social media being, you know, the contributions to a lot of this polarization and division. But I think identity politics comes into play to that as well, because they want to put people in boxes and then make you feel like like you explained, that you're part of something. What kind of training would you give to political campaigns?
Ooh, that is a great question.
Mm.
There are such varying opinions about identity politics. There's some people like, yes, absolutely, embrace, being this, and this, and own it. I'm not saying don't, but I think it's a very dangerous game, because the more we look to separate ourselves from everyone else, the more we will feel isolated and wronged. And that just leads to more victimization. That's self-induced, right? You got enough people doing stuff to you on the outside. You don't need to do it to yourself as well. It's like, looking for an argument. Anybody who's married knows. You just, you don't say, why did you make the bed that way? You just say, thank you. Thanks for making the bed. Why did you look at me that way? What way? Just maybe somebody else was having a bad day, but it's like looking for an argument sometimes. And I think that there is this, there's an amazing book that I got to contribute to. It began as an article, The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. And those two gentlemen have become very dear friends, and they hit the nail on the head. There's almost like this reward in being able to claim that someone did something wrong to you. And it's very dangerous, and it's scary, because we want people to feel empowered, not victimized. I'm sorry, I don't mean to derail from your question about politics, but I have to share this story.
I think it's relevant, so please.
I spoke at Texas A&M, Kingsville, one of their satellite school for A&M. And I came in, I did my thing. It was amazing. They're like, oh my God, you have to come back and talk to our faculty. This is great. Everybody, it just resonated beautifully, as it usually does. And then the director said, oh, come, let me show you our hall of oppression. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're what? And she took me to this foyer that was essentially it was like a science fair of microaggressions. And it was just like they made posters and exhibits and of like all the ways that they've been like screwed essentially by society, because they were gay or they were Black or they were this or they were that. And I'm not saying, listen, don't express your reality. And if you've had something awful, like that's your experience and your history, and I'm not one to deny that. But I think to marinate in it is extremely unhealthy. And right now that's being celebrated and encouraged. And I think that's quite sad, especially for our future, if we don't correct things.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Okay, so there's this book, which I haven't read, right? So I can't really say anything about it, but I will, because I read articles about it. But there's this critical race theory. I think it was developed in the 70s based off of critical theory, which I also don't know a lot about. But in the article, it was quoting some paragraphs, and it was saying that the only way to deal with discrimination, past discrimination, is with present discrimination. And there seems to be also kind of a trend of intoleration toward people who've been intolerant, like this ruminating in the victimhood of the past, or hating the haters, killing the killers mentality, right? Is that what you're talking about in the, what did you call it? The hall of victimhood or something? Hall of oppression. Oh my gosh. Is that really what they called it? I'm just super curious.
I swear to you, that I could listen, I'm creative, but I couldn't make that up.
You're joking.
I think
the hall of oppression.
The hall of oppression comes from a hall of oppression. And I was like, I'd never heard of that before. I thought it was a joke. And then I saw like 20 some displays of, yeah, it was wild. Here's the thing. I try to express this to every single audience that I speak to, because my goal is to empower people. My goal is to get them to understand that they are precious, just their mere existence. The fact that that one little sperm met that egg and made you means you have a purpose and you have a reason for being here. And whatever your packaging is, that should not delineate from who you are and what you have to offer. It's unfortunate that we do live in a society that values certain things over others, from skin color and shade and tone to whether you're attractive or thin, or, you know what I mean? There's so many factors that go into play. But the idea is to not give the haters more power by believing what they're spewing toward you. It's to own your greatness and rise above it. You know, I think part of why I've had such success in my career as a comedian, as a woman, as a Black woman, a woman of color, is because, my parents raised me to know my history, know where I came from, and appreciate that, and know that I wasn't less than because of my skin color. I was very fortunate to have that growing up. And then I went to an all women's college, which was an additional boost of, you got this, just because you're a woman, it has no bearing on what you can and cannot do. And so that's how I approach life in situations. Like, I'm a comedian, I'm a speaker. Yes, I'm Black and I'm a woman. Those are my bonuses. And having that attitude changes everything, because we dictate how people treat us by how we treat ourselves. And that's the part of adversity that I really want to convey to people. Not to say that I haven't been discriminated against or had sexist things happen. I know I have, but they've been minimal. Honestly, they've been minimal. And I think they've been minimal because of my attitude and how I approach things.
You just answered a question that I was going to ask you. How did you handle situations if you've been heckled? On point. But what would you say to people who get offended or triggered if they're confronted by speech that they don't like, besides saying that there ought to be a law? Like, what advice do you have for people?
The same thing that I would say to my children if one of them called the other one stupid or ugly. Is that true? If it's not true, then she wasn't talking to you. I mean, it's honestly, it's like, how much power are you going to give someone else's words? Yes, words are powerful. Exactly. Yes, they are. But they're also only as powerful as we let them be. And more powerful than words are actions, right? And the way to fight and counter bad free speech, which I am a huge I'm an advocate for free speech, but the way to counter bad free speech is with more good free speech. And to not let those people get under your skin, because that's exactly what they're trying to do. And that's what people who are insecure try to do. People who don't value themselves. They want to pull you down with them. Don't give them that power. Don't give them that pleasure. They're sad. And it's unfortunate. So you rise above them and above what they're saying. Listen, it takes energy. It takes maturity. It takes sometimes, blowing steam off somewhere and then coming back to, collecting yourself. Because, a lot of this is easier said than done. But also sometimes it takes hearing what someone else is saying. And that's what I really try to encourage with my work, is not just canceling someone out, right? Because you don't like what they have to say, but maybe investigate why they said what they said. Get to the root of it. Have a real full-fledged conversation, even if it's like this, we're not physically together. But I don't mean online. I don't mean like Twitter and, Facebook, and because that's a fight you'll never win. But an actual conversation, when you sit and you speak with someone, you exchange ideas and you hear where they're coming from and what they're, because most people, that's what it is. Most people just want to be heard.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And it's to listen more than speak at each other.
And the same letters that make up the word listen also make up the word silent.
I love this. People give away their power to words so much they can't change the meanings. So previously I was in a role where I was training a lot of activists and aspiring leaders. And there was this one conservative group. And I remember using the term maybe community organizer or social change or something, which for them was a huge turnoff. It was like a trigger word. Like I needed to give a trigger warning before I said, we're learning to do social change here. And they called me out on it. And we're like, no, we're not doing that. We don't want to hear anything about this social organizing. And so I said, well, hold on a second. So just because, you know, the other football team here uses this language, you're not going to work with other people to advance the causes that you care about because they do. You know what I mean? Are you going to stop breathing because, you know, liberals breathe too? I mean, where do you draw the line here? We really do give away our power. You're a parent. I mean, every parent knows if you freak out when your kid says the F, drop some F bombs, you know, or any other bombs, like you're telling them this is something important. There's something going on here, you know, and you give more energy and attention to that. They're making notes. That's going to get mom and dad's attention, positive or negative.
Absolutely.
I love it.
I was going to say, to Angelette's point, you know, one of the things you were like, well, how do you react to people? And this goes back to, I love, because you brought up the parent thing, Nick, but, you know, when I was younger, my mom used to say, Karith, you know, if you get upset at the ones and the twos, what are you going to do when the nines and the tens come along? If you expended all your energy on the small stuff, essentially, what are you going to do when the really big stuff happens and you need to have reinforcements? You know, you have to make a decision as to how much time and energy you are going to give someone who may not be worth it, or an issue that may not be worth it. You save it up for the big stuff.
That's powerful. That's great advice. That is great advice.
I got one here. What's at risk for comedians like you, or actually just for our country, if we lose our freedom of speech?
And ability to tolerate speech that we don't like.
Yeah.
I think it's a very dark, sad place that we would be heading to. You know, my husband has a really great analogy. He talks about you know, it's like the world that we know it now. It's like this beautiful canvas, and we have the opportunity to make it incredible by adding the different colors and ideas and thoughts to it, and to lose that free speech, to lose that ability for people to contribute their ideas and their thoughts and their words and their language would be like painting this canvas with just one color.
Agent Smith from the Matrix. Me, all me. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. I wonder what people would really think if they actually got their fantasy of everybody in the world walking and talking and thinking and believing just like them. I wonder what life would really be like.
It'd be boring.
After a day.
It'd be boring.
It'd be terribly boring. And, you know, I don't think people really think about it. Like, I think people like to get up in arms, like, oh, so-and-so said that, and they can't say that because that offended me because my cousin's nephew's uncle is a gay Muslim, and that hurt my feelings. I'm like, wait, what? It's one of those situations where I think there's also this heroism, right, that comes with feeling bad or upset for someone else. And that's kind of addictive too. You know, we've been talking about what makes us feel good, what gives us power. But I don't feel like that's a genuine way to get power. Just like putting someone else down, you know, or being right all the time. Like that may make you feel good for a little bit, but in reality, does that really change your life, you know, one iota? No. But you know what does change your life? Having a connection with another human being. And that's what's real. And, you know, the fact that we are facing, you know, a time in our country, at least in America right now, some countries are back on track like Australia and New Zealand, but where we are having to social distance, we're having to not even be in each other's presence as we normally would. We need that connection more than ever. So to waste our energy, our precious, precious energy, fighting and arguing amongst ourselves over stuff that's surface stuff. And when I say surface stuff, you know, I was in New York City for 9/11, and I was working in Midtown on that Tuesday, and I walked home from work that day, and like everybody else, you know, watched everything happen and unfold. And Wednesday, I just kind of holed up in my apartment. But that Thursday, I went out to the Jacob Javits Center on 42nd and 11th. And I was with some friends. And it wasn't just us, it was thousands upon thousands of New Yorkers who had food and water and tools and first aid kits. And it was like all of these people for blocks were lined up to help. And for that moment, and for like 2 weeks in New York City, one of the most diverse places in the world, there was no race, there was no age, there was no politics, there was no gender. It was people there to help people. So I know it can happen because I've seen it. And I don't think it has to take a national tragedy or a natural disaster like a hurricane or tornado to bring people together like that. We just have to have a consciousness and an awareness. And what I call when I teach, I say I want people to care. I want people to care about themselves and care about each other. But CARE is an acronym for conscious empathy, active listening, responsible reactions, and environmental awareness. And if we can invoke that, we're one step closer to tackling this idea that we can't get along or people can't say other things.
Do you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom for people who are actually not quite there and are struggling with this? And they look around, they look out the window, see the world laying in ruins and past the point of no return, or the modern window, their television. And they just see a lot of hate and they see a lot of things they don't like. And they just want to turn around and destroy them and hate them back and not be accepting of those who haven't been accepting, and, you know, beat up the bullies and kill the killers and all the rest of it.
Or words of wisdom for those that think we're about to enter a civil war.
Yeah, at least a civil conflict. We are pretty divided.
We are very divided. I know that there was a poll that I saw not even a week ago that it's 36 or something % of Americans think we will be heading to a civil war within the next 5 years, if not sooner. You know, I think first to answer your question, Nick, to the people that are enveloped by hate right now or anger or angst, if I could just stress anything, it would be that that is not a natural state for us as human beings to be in. It's just not natural. Hate isn't natural for us. It's something we've been taught, and unfortunately, we've been fed, right? And it feeds on hate. And so, if you can find a way to distance yourself from the things that drudge up those feelings in you, the people, the conversations. I don't mean eliminate them all entirely from your life, but take a break, take a step back, just to regroup, right? And focus on what brings you joy, what makes you feel good, and keep that feeling within you, because our feelings, there's a great quote. Hold on, let me find it. I love it. And I know he's considered a very controversial figure, but I happened to see it when I was like, oh, he said that. David Icke, actually, he said, don't confuse the limits of your mind with the limits of possibility. And then my favorite one, which I think really applies to this conversation and the conversations that are happening all across America right now, is our perception becomes behavior, and behavior becomes society. And so what we perceive, what we think, what we take in, and how we interpret it, that becomes how we act, right? And how we treat one another and how we engage with other people. And that then becomes the society reflected from us, from what we perceive. So if we perceive the world to be hateful and cruel and violent, then that's going to be our reality, because that's going to be the society that we create. But if we perceive the world as a place that's loving, that is filled with people that have more in common than they don't, that is filled with people who truly do want peace, then that is the reality that we will also create. We have a choice in this matter. That's what I want people to know. Don't think you don't have a choice, because you do. You are not powerless. You absolutely have a choice.
I love it. You know, David Icke, he is a controversial figure. Recently, his interview on London Real was canceled across all social media channels. In fact, I think because of that, it was probably the most viewed of any London Real episode he had ever done, and led to London Real starting their own, I think, podcasting platform or alternative media platform. But he went on that show, and I watched it because it was banned. He went on that show, and he does have really good lines. One of the lines that he said was, "I may not like what you have to say or agree with it, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it." And I said, my homie.
Amen.
That's why we're friends. Yeah. I think that's a good place to tie the knot on this conversation.
I know you like to summarize a lot of our podcasts.
Well, Jordan Peterson became popular by standing up to an issue he was facing in Canada, where people wanted to compel speech through legislation. Today, we're becoming less and less tolerant of people saying things that we don't like, or not saying things we would like them to say. And there is a lot of talk about, well, the government should do something, and we should erect protected classes and penalties under law for issues of speech. But I want people to do a thought experiment and really consider what it would be like if you lived in a world where people spoke exactly as you wished they would speak and did exactly as you wish they would do. I mean, imagine, extend that to everything, where the world literally is a creation of your imagination, and everything you have total control. You are all powerful or all knowing. I mean, nothing can happen that you don't make happen, and nothing can surprise you because, well, it would only be something that you would make happen. Like, really, if you walk through the control story or fantasy all the way to the end, what a boring and lonely place. Eventually, you're going to want to hit the surprise button. This is stuff that Alan Watts used to talk about. You're going to want some mystery, some challenge, some risk, some unknown. You're going to want some diversity. You're going to want some people who don't think like you. What do you have to bring to the table in a world full of people who know everything that you know and have all your same life experiences? You know what, man? Oh, you do know, don't you? You already know everything. I guess we're done here. What is the communion experience of life? You're alone if you're in a world full of people who are you. You're with yourself. I want people to do that thought experiment, not just think about it for a day, but for a month, for a lifetime, for multiple generations. There's a reason that we have variety and diversity, and find the gift in it, because the old top-down ways of solving problems are creating many of the problems that we're trying to solve. Einstein had also a good zinger when he said, you can't solve a problem in the same level of awareness that created it. And trying to hate the haters, kill the killers, only creates more hate and more killing and more lack of toleration. We have to be able to transcend this way of thinking and think in a new way, and how we can solve this problem from the bottom up. Be the solution. We're the answer. Thank you, Karith, for doing what you do. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being here today. And thank you, listeners, for being here as well.
Yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining us, Karith, and bringing some great insight. And I hope it inspires some of our listeners out there listening to us today. And Karith, I just want to let you know, we always challenge people at the end. And Nick, that was a pretty good challenge right there. But I also, for me, I want to challenge our viewers and listeners to use a bit of humor next time you feel like a conversation is turning a little bit divisive. So share with us and among your friends with this podcast and your challenge by using the hashtag #BeTheSolution. And let's stop criticizing by creating, because I know we can all be the solution. So, and do you have a challenge for our listeners, Karith?
Oh my goodness. You know what? Yeah, I do. And my challenge is to look for the good. Look for the good because it's there. And, you know, when you think that there's nothing to be thankful for or excited about or happy about, find it because it's there. You may have to dig a little, but it's there. And I cannot thank you both enough for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.
Likewise.
All right. Mike,
all right.